Peace and blessings, everyone. We're going to go ahead and jump right in this right away. Um, so, we do know that sometimes when it comes to what happens in our recent times, we immediately run to uh, last days, book of Revelation type things. And we often think that these things have everything to do with whatever the Bible is talking about in terms of the last days, book of Revelation, whatever. One thing in particular that seemed to this has seemed to have jumped up pretty recently here, but when you actually look at it, you'll see that this is actually jumped up for years at a time, and it is addressing the Euphrates River. Now, there is one individual who pretty much is gone all over YouTube and also TikTok, and he seems to be putting together lots of different things, mainly two passages in the book of Revelation that we'll be getting into. And the claim is that he's looking at the Euphrates River drying up, and he's also looking at the book of Revelation talking about how the Euphrates River is drying up, and he's concluding that when John wrote the book of Revelation, and I subscribe to the early date, 62, 63 AD, um, he basically thinks that John is talking about our time. I'm going to go ahead and prove and show that when John wrote the book of Revelation, he was not talking about our time today. John was talking about the first century, his own time that he was living in. So let's just go ahead and jump right into this. We're going to go ahead and stop the Euphrates hysteria. We're going to end prophecy abuse. A lot of times, this is what happens. People end up looking at a lot of modern claims, and they go ahead and take those modern claims and they try to go ahead and apply them to what they see in the Bible. So, if you look in Revelation chapter 16, verse 12, it says, "And the sixth poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, in order that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east." Now, the little Greek says, "from the rising of the sun," which is in the east. What you'll notice here is when you look at how John, a Jew who knew his Old Testament, who knew his, religion as a Jew, you'll start to see patterns in the prophets. Again, I'm going to say this again. You'll start to see patterns in the prophets based on how God works. Notice here that you have a way that is made by drying up a river. And from there, you have people coming through to go ahead and do what they do. What does that sound like? That sounds like the Exodus, where you had some people, you had the Israelites going right in front of the Red Sea. And from there, they ended up going through it after God had parted the sea and they were able to go through. Well, right here, here's an opposite pattern. You have a sea where all of a sudden it's being dried up by God, so that way some really interesting people could come on through and do some real damage. Now, to who? We'll get to that later. But notice this is an opposite motif. That is not by happenstance, that is not by mistake. Again, we're talking about the workings of God here, his angels pouring out these bowls. These are things that cannot be ignored. So that's just a little Easter egg for now. What you're going to notice is that the drying up of the Euphrates River, this is a war tactic. God was not the first to do this. You'll start to see that great kings and generals, even long before this time, have done this as a war tactic. And since that's the case, we have to ask the question, why in the world is God pulling a war tactic, and on who? Those are the two questions that we'll perhaps get to the end. But for now, we're going to go ahead and check out something here. I want to show you something from Herodotus. Cyrus was one of the earliest people to actually pull this war tactic. Remember, there's Euphrates. If you are a man and you're able to have some military means of drying it up to win a battle, well, you'll go ahead and do it, won't you? This is what Herodotus says. He says, Now, Cyrus, now again, Cyrus is a Persian king. This is a man who conquered Babylon. And when he conquered Babylon, he was able to set the Jews free and return them back to their land. And so that way they built the second temple. And you read all about that in Ezra and Nehemiah. He says here, now Cyrus had already, while he was in Ecbatana, sent heralds in all directions to bid the men of the various nations within his empire to provide him with troops, and among other rivers whose course he changed when he marched against Babylon was the Euphrates. He changed the course of the Euphrates, which flows through the middle of the city itself. Well, yeah, that's pretty smart. You're cutting off a river that flows into your enemy's city, Babylon. Cyrus then, on learning from the Babylonians that the city abounded in great supplies of water, and that the river too ran through the midst of it, planned his device. He gave orders to his general to lead off a third part of the whole army by the channel of the Euphrates. When the proper time should come, and enter the city by the bed of the stream, the water being previously turned off into the basin of the lake, which was then a swamp, but is now a considerable part of the city of Babylon. So you can see that it was Cyrus who ended up cutting off the Euphrates River in order to win a battle. Now, again, this is not the only time that this has happened. There's other times that this has happened as well. So you can actually look at other times, like, for example, the Battle of Carchemish. So if you look at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, you go up. According to the Chronicle of Naboth, King Nebuchadnezzar diverted the Euphrates River to weaken the Egyptian army during the Battle of Carchemish. The Babylonians gained the upper hand in the battle as a result. You can also look at the Arab Byzantine Wars. Now, this one is pretty interesting because during the Arab Byzantine Wars, Arab armies led by Khalid ibn al-Walid and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah crossed the Euphrates River to attack the Byzantine Empire. So these guys actually crossed it. They didn't try to divert it or nothing, but notice that it seems like the Euphrates River is being once again used as a tactic of war. He just went right through it. The Arab armies reportedly used makeshift bridges to cross the river and avoid the Byzantine defenses. Now, isn't that interesting? You also have the Russo-Turkish War, 1828. Now, this one, during the Russo-Turkish War, Russian forces crossed the Euphrates River and defeated the Ottoman Empire in several battles, including the Battle of Kars in 1828. So these guys, the last ones, they used bridges. These guys just crossed right through it. You also have the Crimean War. Now, in the Crimean War, this one is pretty interesting because it says here in the Crimean War, historian Orlando Figes provides a detailed account of the Crimean War, including the British capture of the town of Kars near the Euphrates River. According to Figes, the British forces faced significant challenges in capturing Kars, as the town was heavily fortified and defended by the Ottoman army. However, after a long and grueling siege, the British forces were able to breach the Ottoman defenses and capture the town. Again, the Euphrates River, they had something to do with it. Now, you have a military history of the Ottomans from Osman al-Ataruk, and he recalls a Mesopotamian campaign during World War One, when the British and Ottoman forces clashed in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. He notes that the Euphrates River played a significant role in this campaign, as the British forces attempted to cross the river multiple times but were met with heavy resistance from the Ottoman army. Now, Unlike the last army that just crossed it and they did their thing, well, they tried to do it too. But of course, they failed. But where did they get this idea to cross the Euphrates River or to interact with this river to go ahead and get some victory? They got it from previous war tactics. Now you have water and power, politics of a scarce resource in the Jordan River Basin. Historian Miriam R. Lowy brings up the famine of Mount Lebanon, which was caused by the diversion of the waters of the Litani River, a tributary of the Euphrates River, by the Ottoman Empire during World War I. The division of the river's water led to severe drought in Mount Lebanon, which contributed to a famine that killed tens of thousands of people. Again, the Euphrates River was used as a war tactic, this time to kill tens of thousands, unfortunately. You also have, lastly, in their book, Water Resources in the Middle East, Israeli Palestinian water issues from conflict to cooperation. Hillel Shuval and Hazal Dweck gave an overview of the water conflicts in the Middle East, including the attempts both by Iran and Iraq to control the Euphrates River during the Iraq-Iran War. Shuval and Dweck note that both countries built dams on the river to control its flow and create a buffer zone between the two countries. It doesn't stop there. World War One. Yes, during World War One, the Ottoman Empire diverted the Euphrates River to flood the areas around the Suez Canal in an attempt to hinder the British forces in Egypt. Also, you have the Iraq-Iran War in the 1980s. During the Iraq-Iran War, both Iraq and Iran attempted to control the Euphrates River by building dams and diverting its water. The Iraqi government built several dams on the river to control the flow of water to Iran and to create a buffer zone between the two countries. You think it dried up then? This is pretty sad. Finally, you have the Syrian Civil War. During the Syrian Civil War, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIS, took control of several dams on the Euphrates River, allowing them to control the water supply in the region and to use the dams as military targets. So, what of Rome? Now we're back to John in the first century. I already showed you what happened before that time, and I showed you what happened after that time. But I never showed you what happened during that time. Let's see what we can find during that time. First off, let's go to Revelation 16:12. Again, and the sixth poured out his bowl on the great river, and its water was dried up, in order that the way would be prepared for the kings of the east. So I just wanted to read that one more time before we jump in what happened during that time. Now, there is a Roman historian named Tacitus who lived during this time. Again, this is a Roman pagan historian. He has no dog in this fight. He simply wants to build a legacy accurate country. That's all he wants to do. He just wants he has no bias. This is what he writes. Quote, Vespasian, meanwhile, before leaving Alexandria, learned that Vitellius was dead, and so deferred the war in Judea, which he was on the point of beginning. Now, yes, you can look at the War of Judea of 70 AD, when the Romans attacked the Jews, and eventually, in 3.5 years, the Jews lost, and they burned their temple to the ground, and they lost everything. Their temple was ginormous. That year was a big year. That was a big deal. This is what he's talking about. And so deferred the war in Judea, which he was on the point of beginning, in order to learn that Vitellius' successor would do. Titus was sent ahead with one legion and some auxiliaries to take up his position in Judea. For troops with troops from the district of the Euphrates, which had very borders of Syria and Cilicia. So we can see that there are these warriors from the east, these kings from the east. And I believe that Titus eventually did become an emperor, which would make him a king. But there's talk of the Euphrates River, a war with the Jews, and these coming on through the Euphrates River here to go ahead and fight with Judea. This is all during John's time. We also have Josephus. Josephus was born in 30 AD and he died in 100 AD. And he decided to write about the history. And this is why he says, quote, now, as Titus was upon his march into Judea, the auxiliaries that were sent by the kings marched along with him in great multitudes. Those auxiliaries were sent by Vologases, king, and Arbanus, king of Media, and by Isates, king of Adiabene, with many others besides these. Kings therefore did themselves come along with their armies together with Titus. Some of them brought their own auxiliaries, and some of them brought their forces that were under their command, each king having a great number of horsemen and footmen in his own army, insomuch that they all joined together. The whole army mounted to 200,000 footmen. Keep that number in mind for later on. And 10,000 horsemen. So you could see that in these areas, right, in Parthia and Media, once again, these areas are near and around Persia, and all of a sudden they're coming on into Jerusalem. You think they didn't? You think they weren't surrounded by the Euphrates? So let's see. We have some other things. Now we have Tacitus, Josephus. He's a Jew, and who during that time, and of course you have Cassius Dio. They all say, quote, Vespasian sent his son Titus, who was then in Syria, to complete the subjugation of Judea. Auxiliary troops were collected from the neighboring provinces. Now, all of a sudden, you have Josephus. He says, quote, Titus received 2 legions from his father and many auxiliaries, and he had sufficient forces. He marched to Jerusalem and invested the city. Also, you have Roman historian Cassius Dio. He ends up saying Titus, having received some additional troops from Syria and Arabia, resolved an attack on the city. So you can already see that all these types of people coming from the east and to Jerusalem. And all these people. Now, there's one more thing that we can go ahead and look at. We can look at the 200 million man army. This is something that, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just jump into this. Let's see here. First off, 200 million man army, quote unquote, was not meant to go ahead and attack the entire world and things like that and kill a third of the entire world. No, this army was sent to go ahead and knock off a third of Israel. Now, like I said, I could go into deeper accounts of that, of what that means, and to show that, but I'll go ahead and give you one nugget for now. All right. Maybe we'll talk about this another time, but if you look up the word earth in Revelation chapter 9, if you look it up in the Greek, which John wrote his book of Revelation in Greek, he did not use cosmos. He used Gi, and ecumene. Cosmos simply means the whole planet, right? The way we use the word world today. John did not use that word. He used the word Gi for earth. Gi simply means an area soul agent. Therefore, that word does not define the whole planet. It's a specific region. The other word you'll see thrown around is ecumene. That means the current ruling empire, a ruling empire, the geographical area of a ruling empire. That's what it means. And of course, we have Rome right now in the first century. So therefore, when ecumene was being used during that time, it was talking about all the area that the Roman Empire covered. This is why you have other translations of that word ecumene in the English to say, quote, the inhabitable world. That's what they really mean. So let's go ahead and get back to what we have here. We have Revelation 9 because this is an area that the man also in the video from earlier had quoted from. And the number of the troops of the cavalry was 200 million. I heard the number of them. For one, he said he heard the number. He didn't say see it. This is because the book of Revelation is highly symbolic. It is apocalyptic literature. It's an actual genre that ancient people wrote in. If you want an example of that, here's one I came up with personally after I started just learning about it. This is what popped up in my head. Look at the Wizard of Oz. She had a dream, or basically she was in a dream. She didn't realize it to the end. There's a great tornado. Dorothy was taken into this other worldly city. And from there, she ran into four people: a scarecrow, right? A cowardly lion, a tin man, and I believe someone else. Or maybe that was the three. I'm not sure. But we all know what happened in the end. In the end, she woke up. And guess who was with her when she woke up? The milkman, a neighbor, and I believe a friend of her mother's. But when you looked at the three individuals, you saw that they were the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and the Scarecrow. So in the dream, they were one thing. In reality, they were another. This is exactly how apocalyptic literature works. So let's just go ahead and look at this. I decided to go ahead and look up this verse in other translations. And I found something interesting. Look at how it says twice 10,000 times 10,000. Others say 200 million. Others say two myriads of myriads. And it is true that if you add these up, numerically, you do get 200 million. But the problem is that when the first century people were going ahead and talking about armies like this, they were not talking about it in order for it to be multiplied. That is something that we moderners do today. Now, I know this doesn't make sense. I know, I get it. It doesn't make sense. But this is their way of saying, let me see an example I could give here. Have you ever spoken to someone and you said, you know what? It's like they got a million gazillion armies of people out there. And then all of a sudden, 1,000 years later, someone tries to calculate how much a million gazillion is. And from there, whatever answer they give, they think that that's what actually you were talking about. Now, the problem is, that's not what you were talking about at all. You were just throwing out an insane number to say, hey, they got a whole lot of people. I believe in Greek and numerics, there is no number for million. Their highest number back then was 10,000. This is why you continue see in the Greek that they always say 10,000 times 10,000. They never say million. They don't say that because their highest number was 10,000. So when they would say, man, they had like 10,000 people, and that, well, that's just their way of saying that they had a lot of people. We moderners today are the ones that take those numbers and we multiply them. Now, let me show you why this is not the case. First off, two myriads of myriads is 200 million, right? That's what we would do today when we would calculate it up. However, we talk about, this army was basically purposed to go ahead and kill off 1/3 of the people. Now, the moderners today, dispensationalists today say that 1/3 is the whole planet. Us ancient people, we say that's Israel. Why? Because that's what the rest of the ancient world had said. So let's look at something here. I decided to take 1/3 of 200 million people. Now I know that Israel did not consist of 200 million people. Neither did the population back then for the whole planet during the first century either. But I was curious, and this is a number that I got. It's pretty shocking. 66.67 million people. You think that's by mistake? How about this? Jerusalem did not consist of 66.6 million people. Of course, that's just impossible. It's the size of New Jersey. Israel is the size of New Jersey. Now, Josephus says, here's an ancient account. He says 1.1 million people died during the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70, a more realistic number, but still questionable for the first century. At least we could somehow take his word for it because he lived back then. So 1.1 million, 1/3 of that is 366,666. Notice three sixes, 666. Again, do you think that's by happenstance? Now, the total population of Jerusalem at the time of the siege, aside from scholarship, is estimated to have been 600,000. 1/3 of 600,000 is 200,000. Now, why is this significant? Well, do you remember that Josephus ended up saying that there was 200,000 troops that was sent to go ahead and uh, wipe out or battle the people of Israel? I just think that's kind of interesting there. Check this out. Jerusalem's population in 70 AD varies among scholars, but it was anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 people. Interesting. There's your 1/3. Based on the city size and number of houses, as well as the assumption that the population would have been concentrated within the city walls during the siege. However, there is no exact citation for this number, as it is an estimate based on various factors. So 1/3 of 50,000 is what? 16,666. We keep on running into this six number. Interesting. 1/3 of 200,000 is approximately 66,666. There it is again. So that is the literal results. If you want to be a literalist, this is the stuff that you will run into for every angle that you look at this. So the question is, would you send 200 million soldiers to kill 66 million people? Maybe, maybe. How about 366,000? Well, no, there'd be no need. How about 200,000? No, there'd be no need. How about 66,000? No, there'd be no need. How about 16,000? No, there would be no need. No one would spend too much money and time and resources and the wives of men, right? Or the men, basically they would never go ahead and put their population at risk just to go ahead and kill off such a little amount of people. This is what you have to deal with. We know that 66 million people were not in Jerusalem in the first century. So, if you're going to be a literalist about this, this is what you run into. The question is, are you willing to stand on this? Now, if you already see that there's some problems going with the literal route, then all of a sudden you should have some problems with saying that there were 200 million soldiers. So, now if you go ahead with the ancient route, right, this is what you run into. Large armies, especially in apocalyptic literature, were exaggerated simply to express how big their forces were. Reasons could be to intimidate their army or to represent the power of their gods. Revelation 9:16 is not unique. It was common, especially pertaining to locusts. Yes, it's true. Locusts were compared to how numerous armies were back then. Why? Because that was the strongest reference to an ancient person trying to describe armies back then. Judges 7, chapter 7, verse 12, it says, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. In Pseudo-Philo, chapter 31, verse 2, a book relaying Jewish sacred history, is believed to have originally been composed in Hebrew sometime in the first or second century, possibly around the time of Revelation was written. It reads, quote, and the number of those gathered together in 1 hour and slain was 90 times 97,000 men. 90 times 97,000 is 8,730,000. It pertains to when Israel slaughtered the men of Sisera. You believe it was being literal, or you think it was being figurative? As far back as 1200 to 1500 BC, in the Canaanite epic of Curta, it reads, quote, his host is a very large force, as many as 300 myriads, soldiers beyond number, archers beyond count. That's a lot. 300 myriads. Now, we already saw that how many myriads was 200,000? I think 10,000 times 10,000. This person is saying 300 myriads. In Ezekiel, the tragedian, a pseudepigraphal book dating from sometime around the 2nd century BC. In Ezekiel, the Tragedian 203, there were 1 million soldiers in Pharaoh's army who pushed or pursued the Israelites during the Exodus. Now, myriad exaggerations were definitely common. There was a guy named Noman. He wrote a New Testament commentary, and he was also quoted by Bengal. He says in his writing, quote, the Greek word dysmeori appears frequently in 2 Maccabees 9. Dysmeori means 20,000. Dysmerias in the rest of the passage altogether means 400 million. This passage uses hyperbole to emphasize a large number. So, do you think in the times of 2 Maccabees, 400 million was literal or figurative? In the 9th century AD, the Apocalypse of Daniel, chapter 2, and verses 3 and 4 reads, quote, and in their ships will be a myriad myriads, and there will be other infinite and innumerable multitudes. Now, we're going to go ahead and compare that to Revelation 5:1 or 5:11 and 9:16. And check this out. They carry this phrase, myriades, myriadon, chiliades, chiliadon. And in 9:16, these myriades, myriadon. And of course, 1,000, innumerable, innumerable, 1,000. These are the actual meanings of these words. Notice you have innumerable there. Here's another meaning of these words. 1,000, notice it's figurative in these lexicons. 1,000 is literal. So if you see something that says 8,000, the author is being figurative. If you see something that says 1,000, it means the author is being literal. And of course, for another word, it means twice 10,000. Now, you have this word here, which is meant in the New Testament, right? Especially Matthew 18:24, denotes a very large and unlimited number, is usually or is literally 10,000. That comes from J.H. Moulton, and this is basically the vocabulary of the Greek New Testament. That is the vocabulary of the Greek New Testament is basically a work put together by using definitions that were quoted from outside of the Bible. These people decided to see how these Greek words were being used outside the Bible. Now, if you just happen to see something inside the Bible that matches the same usage that people use outside the Bible, well, you got a winner. That is the reason why the VGNT is a valuable source for a Greek definition lexicon. What else do you have? The myriad number and the like is not limited to just army talk. It's everywhere. Look at Paul's writings. Look at how he writes as a Jew during his time. 1 Corinthians 4:15. For though ye have 10,000 instructors in Christ, yet have ye not many fathers? For in Christ Jesus I have begotten you through the gospel. You think he really meant 10,000 instructors? I mean, come on. You only had so many church fathers. You only had so many churches. You think he had 10,000? No. This word here in Thayer's unabridged Greek lexicon actually means innumerable, countless. 10,000 in the authorized version. He also says the same thing in chapter 4, verse 15 and verse 19. Is Paul using the myriad number literally? Or just saying, we got a lot of teachers, but not many mentors? Did he give birth to people when he gave them the gospel? Or was he being figurative? If you agree he's being figurative there, why do you think he would be literal in his uses of the word 10,000? Look at Genesis 32:2. And he calleth the name of the place, singular, two camps, plural. So you're going to call one place by a plural name. Ecclesiastes 6:6. He had lived 1,000 years twice over. Is that being literal or figurative? Psalm 68:17. This is the most telling because it uses the exact phrase words found in our passage that we've been looking at the whole time. Revelation 9, Revelation 16. Two myriads, thousands upon thousands. That's what it actually says. And look, myrioplassion, 10,000s. And you have chiliades, thousands. So this word is used. This is the same word that we seen earlier in the second Maccabees passage. Here it is popping up again. And according to the Apostolic Bible Strong Extension, it says, quote, its meaning is 10,000 and that's it. Its meaning is 10,000. Notice it quotes a psalm as a reference. This exact same word is used in 1 Corinthians 4:15 and again in 1 Corinthians 14:19. And 1 Corinthians 14:19, I gave a little paraphrase version of that verse. It says, use 5 words, not 10,000. You think Paul was being literal when he said 10,000, or you think he was just saying don't use a lot of words? So this is the end of what I have so far. There could have been plenty of things that I could have said, but I did not want to go down a rabbit hole. So I wanted to show you that when it comes to what John wrote about the Euphrates, or what he wrote about the book of Revelation in general, we are not to look at our modern times and simply find a verse and slap a verse to it. What John wrote had a very real cultural context. And we are not to do newspaper exegesis. I think that we should serve the scriptures in a much better way. I hope what I have given to you has really caused you to think. Other than that, that's all I wanted to share. Peace and blessings, guys, and I'll see you all next time.